Well, according to my parents, the day I arrived, it was a cold and frosty morning. About 7 o'clock I arrived, and unusual for the end of September but in Murwillumbah, but it was. And I was taken home about 10 days later, which was what happened in those days. And my parents at that time were living in a unusual type of a house. It was built out of split slabs, and the inside was papered with newspapers. Most of the cracks were between these slabs were covered up with strips of tin, so the wind wouldn't whistle through too much. The floor was a bit air conditioned because it wasn't tongue and groove flooring. It was, from what I can remember, was 6 by 1, just hardwood planks. And of course there were small cracks between them. When the wind blew it, it came inside. And but it was, I suppose it was reasonably comfortable. I didn't know too much about it, because we left that place when I was about 5. My grandfather, Mum's father, lived with us, and also Bertha, Mum's sister, lived with us, because Mum's mother had died when she was about 17. Mum was about, and Mum had to take care of her sisters. The older sister was working as a doctor's receptionist, so she didn't have her to take care of. But the earliest, those are about the earliest memories I have of that house. And one of the things I do remember was my grandfather Nutley trying to teach me how to play cricket when I was about 5 out in the paddock. Now this house that we lived in was right close to my dad's parents. They lived, I suppose it was about 60 metres away in a big old home. They worked, they were employed as on a farm there which belonged to, who the heck did it belong to? Knight Brothers at Dalgaigan. When I was about 5, Pop had saved up enough money to buy a herd of cattle and rent a farm of his own at Crystal Creek. And we moved there, and we were there for 13 years, so really that's where I grew up in my teenage years. And my youngest brother was born when we were there. I can remember in the, of course, Mum and Dad both milked the cows, and of course the kids, the younger ones anyway, Dad had a great big box. It must have been about 1.5 metres square and about probably...
it was a separator box, wasn't it?
No, I don't know what it was. It was 600 millimetres deep. And that's where the younger kids were put, so they, with a blanket in the bottom of it, so they could be kept out of the way of the cows. And when I was old enough, I used to round the cows up out of the outside yard into the yard where the bales were, so they could get them into the bales to milk them. And later on, as I got a bit older, I had to get me a bucket and milk the cows as well. We had a lot of fun as kids growing up on the farm. We used to go fishing, and spent a lot of time fishing on Saturdays and Sundays because we didn't. It was when we were younger. We used to catch catfish and mullet mainly.
In the local creek?
In the local creek, yeah. And we got quite good at catching mullet because they're not easy to catch. You got to be really quick when the cork bobs you hook them.
Did you eat them then?
Oh, you bet.
Ah.
What bait did you use?
Garden worms.
Oh, yeah.
And I also played quite a bit of tennis. There was a tennis court at the school, and then some friends of ours which lived next door to the school also had a tennis court, so we used to use both tennis courts on Sundays. And there was a tennis club which I was part of, and I suppose I was quite a reasonable player in those days. Not that it was any expert, but we used to go shooting sometimes in the bush looking for pigeons, wild turkeys and things like that.
To bring home for food?
I never found any. Pop used to find some turkeys sometimes and, and some pigeons and bring home and cook and eat them.
Was this during the Depression?
It was during the Depression, yeah. Things were pretty tough during the Depression. Pop went and remember for some reason or other he had beans planted in a banana patch which belonged to somebody else, which was way up across the other side of the creek and up on a hill. But these beans grew like mad in this banana patch for some reason or other, and I used to go and help him pick them. But in that banana patch there was pawpaws and passion fruit growing, and he'd always come home with a bag of them. So during the Depression we lived pretty well because we had our own garden and also which us kids looked after mainly. The house that we lived in at Crystal Creek was right on the top of a hill, and it was quite a steep hill both front and back, especially at the back, and the garden was right down across a little creek at the back, and we used to have to go down there in dry times, and after milking the cows we'd carry water up from the creek and water all the garden, and we always had fresh vegetables. Of course, Pop grew pumpkins and potatoes, and jam melons grew wild in amongst the corn paddock when he planted corn, and we also had a lemon tree and an orange tree, which and we used to make jam from these jam melons. It was a great fun time for us kids because we'd get a couple of jam melons on the kitchen table, cut them up and get the seeds out and squirt them at one another and cut up the lemons and oranges. And Mum had a great big boiler about so big round and about so deep that she'd put the jam in to cook it, and it'd cook away there all next day. And of course we had a wood stove which you had to chop the wood for, and that seemed to be one of my main jobs, was to chop the wood for this lemon stove, and it seemed like we always needed to chop wood. But I used to try and get a store in, so I'd get it under the house in case it rained, so we'd have dry wood for the fire.
How old were you then?
Oh, about 10, 11, 12, something like that. So.
Yeah.
So you had to make sure that the wood was always there?
Yeah, Pop used to go out and, with the horses and haul home a log, and then he'd maybe split it into several pieces, and then we had one of these trestle kind of things that you put it on logs on and saw it up into lengths and then split it. And had a grindstone. It's about terribly round, this grindstone. It must be bigger than that, I think. And about 4 inches thick. And you turn it with a handle. You had to put water on it. And I used to get the job of turning it while Pop sharpened the axe on it. Take faster, take faster. Anyway, you do a good job of sharpening the axe on this thing.
Being born in 1928, I guess I was in the middle of the Depression, beginning of the Depression, because that's what we were doing on a farm away up Tallabudgera Creek. My brothers and sisters above me were born in Southport when Dad worked in Southport as a carpenter and a builder of many, many houses all around the district. But as the work got more scarce, he was having to go further afield, way out to Beaudesert from Southport and up almost to Brisbane to get work. And of course Mum would be left home with the 2 oldest children, and she got up occasionally to get up and camp with him while he was working, but Dad decided this is not good, so he finished up his business in Southport and bought a farm up Tallabudgera Creek, well up the creek. The roads were quite primitive in those days, and so when I was born they were just newly into this house that Dad had built up there on the farm. They called the farm Bonnie Glen up Tallabudgera. So I was born in Southport. I had an auntie who had never married, and she was a trained nurse to the point where she had her own hospital, private hospital, in Nerang Street. And so I was born there. Mum had to go to her sister-in-law's, didn't she? She couldn't go anywhere else, whether she wanted to or not. And Auntie Bess, being an old maid, was a bit cross, and Mum didn't like that too much. But anyway, it was 28 was a season of heavy rain, and so when it came time for Dad to come in from the farm to pick up Mum and baby Gwynn, up the old road they went and over the slippery hills, and finally got nearly home, and there was one final creek to cross, wasn't there, Dad? Crossed the creek crossing, and the creek was quite high by then. Dad had probably the old Chevy, I think, at that time. You'd know more than I would have.
I think it was a Chev 4 he had then.
And the story goes, we came round into the creek, and Dad saw it was very high, but he needed to get his wife and his new daughter home, so he put it in full power and went through the creek. And Mum said, oh, it was starting to wash down. I could feel it washing, and I knew there was a huge hole just down there. And Dad really put the power on, apparently, and came out the other side, so all was well. up the hill and up to the house. It was a lovely home, set in a valley.
Still there.
It's still there, and it's looking beautiful. Kept it up to date, and I grew up. I can remember brothers and sisters around me, being the third, not like Dad was the first one. And we had good times when we were children, similar to Dad's, because we were milking cows. I can actually recall Dad building the first yard, because he just newly bought this farmland, and he built a circular yard because he didn't like the idea of the cattle horning one another into corners and hurting one another, so he thought, I'll fix this, I'll build a circular yard, and they can't get each other into the corners. That was my Dad. And And so also we had a up in the yard, where the cattle were milked, the cows were milked, there was this large box like Dad had, and I remember it being a separator box. That they'd bought a new separator. It was what brand was it anyway?
Alpha Laval, probably.
Alpha Laval, probably, and they were a huge, big box that all came in. The separator was to separate the milk from the cream at the end of milking the cattle, the cows, and that was part of the job. I can recall quite early, as soon as I could reach the bottom of the separator, trying to get it wound up when the last cows were being milked, ready to start the separating. And the handle, I can remember pushing the handle up and then grabbing it and pulling it down because I couldn't reach quite to the top.
So you had to wind this big handle?
Yeah, absolutely. And so yes, and as we were children, there was a looking out from the yard where Mum and Dad and my older brother and probably Marge, can't remember, but she would have been milking, I suspect. Marge was playing with us, I think, at that time. And across to it, just a little way across, there was another hill came down. And we children used that as an amphitheatre to perform for our parents. Mum and Dad said, right, there's your stage, we're watching. And of course children, if they think their parents are watching, can get up to all kinds of things. So we did. We rolled and we played and they could see all of us. As soon as they couldn't see one, they worried, but they couldn't stop the milking because the job had to be done. So we had to be where they could see us, and the hen house was just down the hill a little bit, and as we got a little older we'd climb up on there and use a sheet as a parachute and jump off and things like that, but that was all right. It was only once Marge knocked herself out doing that. And that was after Mum had gone down to tea, so and Dad saw it happen from the yard, and he raced down and got her round, dragged her around behind the barn so her mother wouldn't see her, brought her round, but it didn't stop us. We kept on jumping off the chook house. It was great fun, and the parachute never worked, so we always landed on the ground.
Didn't break any limbs?
Oh yeah, that's another story. But yes, it was a happy time on the farm, and also as Dad's idea of having plenty for his family to eat during the Depression was a good one, because we lived well, like Dad's family. We lived on the chickens our own eggs. We had lots of things growing. Also Dad planted bananas in the higher part of the property, which did very well because they were higher than the frost line, and that was a story too. We'd have to trek up with his lunch when we were quite small. Look out for snakes, Mum used to say. That was the last thing she said before we took off with Dad's lunch up the hill. Look out for snakes now. But coming down was the best, because I used to love to run from the top of the hill to see how soon I could get to home. And you know, it's like flying. You just kind of run so fast that your legs take off, and you jump about, it seemed about 6 yards. And that was fun. That was great fun. And you got down to the bottom of the hill. We had a cubby house in a cedar tree, a lovely white cedar tree. That was where I took my book and read, up in the top limbs of the cedar tree. And it was beaut up there, and the gum from the cedar you can chew like chewing gum. I used to sit and enjoy the chewing gum and read my book when I had time, and that was reading was a big thing in those days, and plenty of books. The story of the broken arm, this one was, that was another story. When I was older, I was 9 when I broke my arm, and there was a horse we had, and Dad didn't want me on it. Anyway, I wanted to ride this horse, and there was a dip between our top farm and the bottom farm where the cattle were coming up from, No, we were going down to the bottom farm that day. And Ron was my oldest brother. He was riding the horse. And I was herding around with him, on my feet. As soon as he got over the dip down into the creek, like they are, so that when they're in flood they can come to the top. As soon as he got over the edge, I said, Ron, I want to ride on Joy. No, Mum said you can't have a ride on Joy. Oh, but I'll tell her about something you did that you shouldn't have done. Oh, all right. Wasn't that awful? And so he let me on Joy, and I had a great time herding the cattle, but the bed of the creek was huge, big rocks. You know what Tallabudgera Creek's like, and the other creeks about here. And the horse turned when the beast didn't. And of course Gwen fell off, didn't she?
Gwen didn't turn with the horse.
Gwen didn't turn with the horse. So down I came on a rock. On a rock that way, that's right. It was sticking right out like so. Next thing, Mum and Dad hear a scream from the creek bed, which was about 100 yards away.
It would be.
A couple of 100 yards away. Ron threw me up onto the horse in front of him, and we took off up to the house with the arm still sticking out like that. The first thing Mum did was bang it on to make it flat again. Couldn't have it there, it might come through the skin, mightn't it? And then the ride all the way into Southport, down the windy old road again. And to Auntie Bess's again, and the doctor had to come and pulled and tugged to get it apart, get them so that they sort of met. That was painful.
No anaesthetic? No
anaesthetic, no. And I can still feel Mum pulling there, and the doctor and Auntie Bess on this one to get it back a bit. And a big plaster right up round there, which I had on. It ended up on for 6 months, that bit, because they took an X-ray after 3 months and it had mended like that, hadn't it? So then it had to be broken again, and I did have an anaesthetic for that. And they reset it, yeah. So we had a lot of fun times, I suppose. It was all go. Oh, the cricket, that's right. Dad had built a radio. It was in the early days of radio. Dad had to have a short wave, didn't he? He bought all the bits and put them together. And we had a short wave radio. And he used to think he listened to London, so he could get the British cricket. And I know nowadays they say that it wasn't shortwave, it was only pretend, but it seemed like it did come. And so this must have been about the same time, I think. I must have been 6 or 7 or 8. And Dad would say, "Go down and listen, girl, and get the score for me." And it was such fun to put these headphones on and listen, and amongst all the crackling and all the noise, and then try and remember the score, and who was out and who wasn't out. And race up to the yard again to tell Dad what the score was and who was out and who'd bowled who. So, Dad didn't say too that Dad's a good slow bowler, aren't you? He's a slow bowler, twisty one, you know, like Warner used to be. School, I suppose school was just kind of incidental. It was one of those things that we had to go to. We had a teacher that was a good teacher, I think. In those days we wrote on slates to begin with a slate pencil. And if he didn't like your work, he would
throw the slate at you.
That's right. Many a time I've had the slate thrown at me and it hits the wall behind, and sometimes it shattered and sometimes it didn't. But if you did lovely work, I can remember drawing a map one day, and I thought it was so beautiful in my book, because I liked geography and I liked drawing maps and drawing. And I must have got a town on the coast a little bit out or something or other. And he threw it at me, and all the pages went all turned up the corners, and it was all dirty by the time it hit the floor and about it, and I picked it up and took it home. But that was his way of disciplining you, I suppose. so nowadays you wouldn't do that.
No.
But we rode, we walked 3 miles to school and 3 miles back, down to Tallabudger State School. And it was good learning years.
And how long would that take?
I can't remember time, Mark. We just
half an hour.
through. I
Half
suppose
an hour probably.
half an hour. And then later on, when I could ride the horse, I did ride the horse. And I can remember a few stops along the way where there were, what's those trees that have the red...
Lily-pilly.
Lily-pilly tree. There was a beautiful lily-pilly tree, and it used to come out with red berries, and it was a very tall tree. It was huge. The only way I could reach it was standing up in the saddle and reaching up, so you'd have a good feed of lily-pillies on the way home.
Oh, you could eat them?
Oh, they're
Oh, yeah.
great. You get yourself a lily-pilly, you can buy them. They make a
They're good
nice hedge. We've got 2 in a pot down in Sydney at the moment, hoping they'll have lily-pillies, because we both did that when Dad and I were similarly raised, actually, just across the border. Dad in New South Wales and me in Queensland. We didn't know one another, but we could have known one another. So we've got a lot in common from when we were children. So,
What about memories from school,
other than the books,
other than the books being thrown at you?
a lot rode horses to school, and my favourite subjects were drawing and mapping, writing compositions, and anything but sums. Arithmetic, I didn't care too much about that. Dad tells me that was his favourite subject, so we hoped we'd have perfect kids, you see, after when we talked about these things before we were married. We thought, well, that ought to be a balance, oughtn't it?
What memories does Dad have from school?
School was never my favourite pastime. It was something you had to do. I didn't really dislike it. I guess I got along all right. There was a tennis court at school, so at lunchtime we used to play tennis. I enjoyed that. And we played cricket as well. I had to, I guess it was about 2 miles to school from where my parents lived. But when I was about 10, I went to live with my grandparents, who were about 1 mile from school. And the reason I had to go there was because one of the sons left home and went, I don't know where he went. He went to work somewhere. I guess he figured he could do better by leaving home and going somewhere else. And they were milking 100 cows. And there's only left 3 of them to milk these 100 cows.
It's a lot of work. It's hard. All
It was
by
milked
hand in those days.
No machines.
No machinery.
And so I was seconded to my grandparents to help with the milking of the cows. So mornings were up about, well, before daylight. I don't know what time it was. It was before daylight to get out there and milk the cows. And it was all right in the summertime, but in the winter time it was murder. Especially when from the house to the yard was about 100 metres, I suppose, and you had to be white with frost, bare feet through the frost.
Yes.
Then onto the concrete floor, which wasn't much better. And you had to get out into the yard to get your cows into
Cold
the
mud.
in the icy cold mud. And we milked these cows. I had 15 I had to milk, so the others made up the rest of the 100. And
Before you went to school.
before I went to school. And after the milking, I'd dash over the house and change my clothes and grab some breakfast and run to school. I used to be able to go across country instead of going around the road because it was a lot shorter. But I had to wade through a creek, which was usually only about halfway up to your knees, unless there was a freshen from the rain, and then it might be over your knees, and it was running quite fast, and it was really, I was pretty stupid. And my parents were pretty stupid, or someone was, to let me go through there, because a number of times I almost lost my balance in this creek. And I didn't swim all that well. I could swim, but not all that well. But survived it. School lunches. Raspberry jam. I hated raspberry. I never want to see another bit of raspberry jam in my life.
Well, your auntie used to put them up
Yeah,
for
my auntie
you,
used to
didn't
put
she?
up my sandwiches for lunch.
She'd always put the same.
Raspberry jam.
Mum did better than that. She gave us one,
Yeah.
I think, if I remember rightly.
But eventually, I spent about 2 years there, I think, until time for high school, and then I went back home. But I still had to help milk the cows before. I ran down the hill and across the flat and across another creek to catch the bus to high school. And sometimes I got there in time to put my shoes on, and sometimes I had to put my shoes on in the bus.
Had a bus by high school, did you?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Well, it was 7 miles away.
Oh, that's right. High school was in Moorlamber
Yeah.
for Dad.
Yeah.
And what was high school like?
Well, it wasn't bad. I mucked about more than I learned, I think.
It wasn't as essential in those days.
No, it wasn't.
I
really.
don't believe, because Dad was planning a trade anyway, weren't you?
I didn't know what I was planning. I guess I must have been about 12 when my Dad taught me to use the double-barrel shotgun. And that's quite an interesting experience, because they kick like a draft horse. We were in the middle of a drought, and some of the cows were dying, and they would get down and they couldn't get up, and Dad had gone off cane cutting to earn some extra money, and Mum and I were left to look after the farm. And one of the cows got down and we couldn't get her up, so Mum said we'll have to kill her and dig a hole, bury her. Okay, so I get the shotgun out, and he showed me how to use it, but I'd never fired it before. So I get down in front of the cow.
Oh, this bit's horrible.
And I shot the cow all right, but it knocked me over backwards.
Did the cow die?
The cow died all right.
Good.
Then I had to dig a hole beside the cow, dig enough to bury a cow. Now that's a big hole.
How old were you then?
Must have been about 14, I think. 13, 14, something like that. 14 probably. Anyway, I spent the rest of the day digging this hole, and then right beside the cow, and then you've got to get the blooming cow into the hole. Which I eventually did with Mum's help, and probably my brother's help too. And that was the end of that one. But there used to be hares. Do you know what hares are?
Like,
They're like a rabbit.
like rabbits?
They're a bit like rabbits, but they're bigger than rabbits. And they used to get in the garden, and they'd eat everything in the garden if they got in there. And whenever we saw one, we'd get after with the shotgun. And I got quite a few of them.
Did you eat them?
You bet we did. They were good eating.
Didn't waste anything.
No?
What about the pellets?
Oh, you'd find them. But the most interesting thing I ever did with the shotgun was one morning I'd just gone up to the house for some reason or other. We'd just about finished the milking, I guess, and I saw two foxes fighting, and they were down across the bottom of the hill, across a flat which was about 100 yards wide, and across another creek. And these little creeks were a lot of rubbish growing in amongst them, and there were quite high banks either side. So I grabbed the shotgun and 2 cartridges in the double barrel. Down I went across this flat, and I got about halfway down. I saw the foxes go down into this first creek, and just as I got there about 30 metres away, one of them came up right in front of me. And I upped the gun and knocked him over. And within a matter of seconds, the other one came up the other side of the creek, and I dropped him too.
You
And
weren't
no
very
one-
old, were you?
No, I was about 13, about 14, I think. And no one would believe me that I shot 2 foxes, because foxes were things that were really hard to get.
And they were vermin. I mean,
Yeah, they were vermin.
They killed the little calves when they were born.
And there was a bounty on them. I think you got 5 shillings or something for a scalp. So I drug them home and skinned them and hung the skins up to dry, and everyone I told wouldn't believe it. No, you couldn't shoot 2 foxes. You couldn't even shoot 1 fox.
So that was a good story.
Anyway, still about 12, and Mum and I were home on our own, and somehow a black snake about 6 foot long had got into the house.
Poisonous?
Yeah, red belly black, very poisonous. And Mum let out a yell, and snake, she said. Anyway, I said, oh, I'll get him, I'll get the shotgun. But the shotgun was in the same room as the snake was. You know, I eventually got the shotgun, and the snake had disappeared into we had some boxes and stuff in there, and a lot of stuff stacked in this spare room. And I said, okay, I'll get the ladder, I'll get up at the window. So and if he shows, I'll shoot him. Anyway, I got up there and I sat there for must have been 10 minutes, and the snake never showed up. So I gave that up, and I got a shovel and got in the room and started stirring things around, and eventually came out and I clobbered him with the shovel. And to the day we left that house, there was still a stain on the floor where I'd clobbered the snake with the shovel.
And your mother was a clean woman that scrubbed like mad.
Yeah. She could never get that stain off, that blood stain, snake blood stain off them.
Well, you liked it, didn't you?
But it was a bit scary trying to, stirring up these boxes because when a snake gets stirred up, they get pretty excited, and not much room in there to move around. But there was enough anyway. But as kids, we used to catch snakes, catch them by the tail, because there were quite a lot about out in the farm. And catch them by the tail and swing them around your head and whack them up against a post.
To kill them.
You kill them. You catch these poisonous snakes like that, but it's we thought nothing about it. Just only we did. Remember one I got by the tail once, and he got into a stump, and I was pulling and pulling, the darn thing wouldn't come out. Never did come out. I had to give it away.
Still there today. Oh my.
But there's the kind of things we got up to as kids.
That's pretty scary.
Things that the kids today miss out on.
Yeah, well,
We lived on the top of this steep hill, and we used to ride our bikes down flat out. And for some reason or other, the brakes on mine used to, it was handbrake, used to squeak like the dickens. And one of my brothers said, "I put a bit of oil on it." So he put a bit of oil on it, and I got up to go down the hill, and did I go down that hill?
That would be your brother Ivor would say that. He'd still say it today.
Didn't squeak, but boy did I go. That brake didn't do a bit of good.
You knew better. Oh dear. He was a kidder.
I finished up at a heap down the bottom. But it was grass, so it didn't matter.
And you rode your bike to Tweed Heads, you used to tell me, you and your friends.
Oh yeah, I used to ride to
Miles on a Saturday.
Saturday or Sunday sometimes. We'd go to from Wollongbar to Tweed Heads, which was about 27 miles.
That was in your 10 years, was it?
Go down there and back again. That was before the Air Force, yeah.
It's a good trip on a bike.
Yeah, oh, you get in behind a car or a truck and you weren't going more than about 30 miles an hour. You could just sit there and they'd kind of drag you along. You'd get about a metre away from the back of it.
Oh dear.
Take your life.
As long as they don't stop, it's fine.
But I did that. Oh, I used to do it regular. Go to Kingscliff sometimes fishing and get some bream and things like that. But it was teenagers' years were a lot of fun those days. There was no drugs or grog. I remember one night we went to Coolangatta and we decided we'd try every milk bar from the border gates to the up to Kirra. I had a hangover about as bad as you'd get from beer.
A milkshake at every place?
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, that was fun, eh?
It was at the time. Okay, over to you. So, because of I was still in the Depression. 1939 was when the war started, and I was in high school in September 1939. The Second World War started, and things weren't all that good. There wasn't much money about, and after 1 year's high school I was old enough to leave school, so I had to leave school and go and earn some money, because my parents couldn't afford to keep me in high school. And so I got various jobs, picking beans and picking peas and cucumbers and potatoes and all kinds of things on various farms within a few miles either way of where we lived. And I did all right out of that, made reasonable money there.
How did you get into building then?
Well, we got a new set of dairy and bales built. The old ones were condemned. They used to have inspectors come round every year and inspect them to make sure that they're up to standard. The old ones were condemned, so I had to build a new set. And Dad hired a builder to...
That was where you milked the cows, is that right?
Yeah. And Dad hired a builder to come and build this dairy and bales. Because you ran the cows into the bales and you milked them, and so he was, he lived with us while he did it, because he turned up with his toolbox,
The builder.
on his push bike. And so at the end of that I said to him, what's the chance of getting a job? Oh, he said, well, think about that. He said, come and have a talk to me. So I went into his office and had a talk to him one day, and he said, yeah, okay, we'll give you a job. And he was building a house just about 2 doors away from where he lived. So I went in there. I had to ride my bike 7 miles to work every morning and 7 miles home at night from where we lived. And It was a fibro house. And my poor old thumb was so beat up because you're driving nails in through fibro, and if you missed the stud, which you very invariably did, you hit your thumb side on.
You learned to hammer.
Yeah, but I survived that anyway, and that's where it began. After a couple of years, he bought out a joiner's shop because the chap that owned it had gone to the war and it was closed down, so he bought into it, and from then on I worked part-time in the joiner's shop and part-time out building houses. And
joiners make windows and what else?
we were making windows and doors and wardrobes and kitchen cupboards and all kinds of things.
So you were apprenticed?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. When you were doing that, I was still in primary school, wasn't I? And why did Dad decided that he needed to have another farm? Because in those days, a man had a son, he had to have the farm to pass on to his son. So Mum and Dad went looking for a farm, and they found one near Nambour, up in the north coast, and it also grew sugar as well as cows and milking. And so we had someone take over our farm down at Tallabudgera, and we moved up our furniture and everything up to the farm at North Arm. It's part of the property now is where Fair Hill Nursery is up there, and
It's all cut up into 5-acre blocks now.
Broken up into blocks. But the old home is still there, but they've planted trees all around it, so you can't see it. But Colleen tells me she has a photo of the old place, so she's going to get that for us. Because it was a lovely home too. It had 6 bedrooms, I think. And it was a huge home, beautiful tennis court out the side. But it was work. And we moved up there, and I didn't tell you while we were still at the other place. My sister Marge got to the age where she needed to go to high school, so she was sent to a private ladies' college up in Toowoomba. And Fairholme on the range, just as you go up on the right. And she was up there for a few years, a couple of years. Anyway, we moved up the coast to North Arm and enjoyed the farm. Owen and Colleen and I were going to school at that time. It was a one-teacher school. It's still there today, and he was a good schoolmaster, this one, and a good man.
Didn't throw things at you?
He didn't throw things. He used to use the belt, the cane, and the belt, but mostly on the boys. and so I enjoyed school those years there, and one day a week I would catch the train to go into, it was my last year of junior school, to go into Nambour to do domestic science, and which was sewing and cooking, which was enjoyable. Catch the train and go in and come home at night, and that was in Nambour. So, and then what happened? Oh, we had a year or two there after Marge was home from school, and we all enjoyed working on the farm, and it wasn't too heavy work at that time. My sister Colleen had an accident in a cane fire about that time. She was caught in, when they were burning off the sugar cane, she was caught between the fence and the cane, so we almost lost Colleen. She was so badly burned. She was in hospital for several weeks in Nambour. The fact that the call-up was there, and my brother joined the army, Marjorie joined the army, and so there was only Dad and Mum and I to run the farm. So Dad said, Gwyn, you're not going to be able to continue your school any longer. Gwyn had to stop to work on the farm. So I loved school up there too, and I was a little disappointed, but what did you do? Dad had to have some help because he wasn't too well at that stage. I think it was worry of the war and everything in general, because it was all around us. There were army camps in this direction and that direction. We were just about on what they called the Brisbane line, where the Australia was to be saved, anywhere south of the Brisbane line. But in the north we were all ready to evacuate, have a scorched earth policy, burn everything, drive our cattle if we could, and head for the, I don't know where, Dad knew. It was a plan they had all drawn up. So, and the back hill of our property was quite tall, and every day there would be practice bombing from the Air Force.
Air Force bombing
dropping something. We used to watch them fluttering down and onto their target to practice, I suppose. So it was war all around us, really. And so Dad and I were working on the farm then, and we used horses. We had no tractors. We needed to keep the farm going. We needed to plough the fields and plant the sugar cane and harvest the sugar cane and keep the weeds out. And so every day from daylight to dark, first we'd go out about 4 o'clock to round up the cows. And I was like Dad, I didn't like the frost on my bare feet too much. But you do a powerful lot of thinking when you're out there, out on your own at the early in the morning. It was beautiful, rounding up the cattle, running from one warm spot to the next where the cows had laid, so that you got your feet a little bit warmed up while you were rounding them up. And doing the milking, Dad and I, Mum would help too then. And Owen and Colleen were too small. Owen was 4 years younger and Colleen 6 years younger. So yeah, they helped with the feeding of the calves and the pigs, and Dad's war with the pigs is another story too. I can tell you a good story about that. But yeah, so it was straight after breakfast, get the horses in and harness them all up with the heavy collars around their necks and the chains, and off I'd go, and Dad would say, you do the bottom paddock and I'll do the top paddock today. And off we'd go. And so I started to learn early to plough a straight furrow with a moldboard plough. And I liked the harrowing best because that was to break down after you first plough, then you harrow, and it's spikes going into the ground on a flat. I don't know, how would you explain harrow? Anyway.
Well, it's usually a timber frame.
No, it was a metal one, this one.
No, okay, it was a metal frame. It had these spikes about 200 and 250 millimetres
broke up the soil.
long, staggered all along on this
And
this frame.
I liked that because I stood on it. Dad used to say, be careful you don't slip through there, girl. Because it wouldn't have been so good. But,
my dad banned me from standing on it.
But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing it, and I really felt like I was doing war work, war work. And because we were feeding the troops, weren't we? Even if it was only butter and milk and sugar. The sugar mill was in Nambour, and the sugar was burned and loaded on to trucks and into Nambour. So what did I do for recreation? I don't really recall too much. We went to church on Sundays in Yandina, and we had a little car that was very frugal of petrol in those days because there was a great shortage of petrol to use during the war, so you had to have a car that wasn't a big Chev or what Dad usually had. So he bought a standard
12.
What was that really, a standard?
Standard 12.
Yeah, but what type of car was it?
That's what they were standards.
Never heard of them these days.
They're made in England.
A little English car, and Mum thought it was lovely. And we went to church in that. We went into shopping in Nambour. We did our shopping. And I recall one interesting episode where the little pigs were to be taken into Yandina to be put on the train to be sent to market. And so Dad crated them in a crate, and being a little car and not a truck, because Mum liked a car, she didn't want to ute. We couldn't all fit in that, could we? And they put them on the back seat with a tarp or something under it so it would be clean. And just halfway into Yandina, the pigs got out of the crate. I wasn't with Dad that day, but I was with Mum when Dad returned and came sheepishly up the back stairs and said, "I've had an accident. I've had a terrible, terrible time. You won't believe what a terrible time I've had." "Oh," Mum said, "what happened?" "Oh, you better come and have a look at the car." And all along the back window, these little pig snouts all over the window where they'd been, all climbed up the back seat looking out the window. And I've never seen Mum so upset. Oh, I'll never get the smell out of it on. And she vows till the day we sold it, the smell was never out of the car. She tried disinfectant, she tried everything she could think of to clean the car, but she couldn't. So that went on. That was the war work. We had often had the boys that we'd picked up at church, that had been to church from the army camps, and we'd bring them home for a meal, for lunch, and we'd all sing. Mum played the piano, so we'd all sing around the piano, and they were all decent kids, decent young men, and I wasn't too interested in them at that stage. I was still growing up, but they were good fun, and it was nice. We sang lots of fun songs around the piano, and they would enjoy that very much, and a lovely cooked roast dinner when they came home from church, and then in the evening Dad would take them back to the camp. And so that was about the social life, I suppose. There was a boy over on the next hill that used to think he fancied me, and would send me notes all the time, which I completely ignored because I didn't like him. And he'd stand on the hill at the farm and try and do signals to tell me what he was saying, and I'd turn around and walk the other way because I didn't like him too much. He was all right, but I didn't like his style. Anyway, we played tennis a lot. We did have a court at the house, so we did quite a bit of relaxation on Saturday afternoons, playing tennis and picnicking and with the neighbours and things like that. So we did quite a bit of that.
And of course then when I was 18, on my 18th birthday, I joined the Air Force. And I figured it'll only be a month or two and I'll get my call up, so I said to the boss, I've joined the Air Force, I'm going to quit work. And I didn't get my call up very quick, and so I went and got a job as a bloke in a banana plantation, which was not too far away from home, a couple of miles, 3 miles I suppose. And but to get to the Blue plantation was a day's work. It was this steep hill, and I mean steep, you almost had to scramble up to get up there. And after I'd been there for a couple of weeks, he said, well, the plantation needs digging up. So he decided we'd dig the whole area in amongst the bananas with fork hose. Now, you know what a fork hose is like? No. You know what a garden fork is?
Yes.
Well, a fork hose is like a garden fork that's right angled to the handle. And we dug up 9 acres with those fork hoes, the two of us. It took us about a month, I guess, in between cutting bananas and packing them and shipping them off and things like that.
So that was hard work.
And that was hard work.
Hard work for a
hard work getting
boy.
up there to start with. If I eventually got my call up to the Air Force, I was the fittest one in there. We do some route marches, and they didn't mean a thing to me after climbing up this hill to work and then working all day up there. But some of the other poor guys, they about died. Well, I eventually got my call up for the Air Force and went to Sandgate for 6 weeks basic training. And an interesting thing there was that the drill sergeant that was in charge of our mob was a mate of mine from Murwillumbah that I'd known for years.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So?
I don't think he showed me too many favours, but he may have done. But
Made you feel at home?
yeah. Because I was so fit from all the work I'd done in this banana patch, I was didn't have any problem with the basic training at all, where some of the guys really suffered. After the 6 weeks training, I went to Canberra, spent a couple of months there doing some more training. And after that I was posted to Pinkenbar in Brisbane for a while, to a unit that was receiving a lot of equipment back from Darwin and for the airfield construction squadron that all needed fixing up, and we were also getting a lot of new equipment that we were sending to the islands. We used to go across Brisbane and unload a trainload of trucks and drive them across to Pinkenbar. First time I'd ever driven a truck. I had a driver's license, but we were driving these Ford Blitzwagens through Brisbane in the morning at traffic. Of course, the traffic wasn't like it is now. And after a few months there, I was posted to No. 1 Airfield Construction Squadron, which was in Sydney, reforming, ready to go up to the islands. They had been in Darwin when Darwin was bombed, and they'd finished their work there, and they'd all come back down to refit and get new equipment, and we did a lot of work around Sydney. Did some work on the Sydney airport. And
just practicing?
Yeah, learning to drive bulldozers and graders and all that kind of stuff. And we did work out at Moorebank for the Army, some big store sheds they wanted out there. We did the earthwork for them. And the time eventually arrived where we were herded onto a troop ship called the Carlos Carrillo. It was a Liberty ship, and they were ships that were built in a hurry for the war for cargo carrying. This one had been converted to a troop ship, and it rode very high in the water because it was designed to carry lots of cargo. And going up the Queensland coast, we ran into a cyclone. Most everybody on board was seasick. I held out for several days and eventually got a bit of seasickness for one day, and I completely recovered from that, and the cyclone was over by then, so we had a smooth trip from then. We went on from there up to Biak, an island in the Pacific, where we anchored in the harbours there for a couple of days, waiting for a convoy to form up, because up to there we'd gone alone. You know, Carlos Carrillo got along pretty well, but in the rough seas, the because it was so lightly loaded, the prop used to come out of the water sometimes. It'd thrash right out of the water. But
Slippery too.
it was a steel deck. As you can imagine, walking on a steel deck in hobnail boots, it'd slip and slide all over the place. And it was so hot below deck, most of us would bring up a couple of blankets and sleep on deck at night, if you could find a place to lie down. And we eventually got the convoy from Biak to take us to an island called Morotai in the Celebes, or the Celebes as some people call it. And
It was driving the Japanese back by this time, wasn't it? That
yeah,
was
the Americans and the Australian Army had pushed them back somewhat.
pushing them back from
But
New Guinea up through.
at Morotai we did some various kinds of work on levelling sites and road work.
You
and
landed in the oil first, you missed that.
no.
Oh, different place, I'm sorry.
When we got to Morotai, we didn't have any air equipment because it was coming on a different ship. And the thing you didn't do was volunteer for anything much in the services. But one morning they said, "Does anyone here can drive a crane?" And I'd never driven a crane, and nobody put up their hand. I said, "I'll have a go." And for the next month, I drove a little crane around, unloading stuff. When all our equipment came, all in boxes, I got the job unloading it all off the trucks with the crane and putting it in store sheds. Eventually the time came to go to Borneo. We didn't know where we were going. But we loaded on landing ship's tank, they called them, which were a large landing craft that drove up onto the beach, and you drove your vehicles either into the bottom deck or up to the top deck. And I was assigned to drive a weapons carrier, which is like a large four-wheel drive ute. And some comedian had got the idea to put a whacking great big compressor on the back of it to tow it. I took off and got halfway up the ramp and it stalled, wouldn't go any further. And the brakes wouldn't hold it. Ran back and jackknifed just as well the ramp had sides on it, I got over the side. But then they had to hook a winch onto the front of it from up the top and winch me up. And we several days at sea before we got to where we were going, which was an island called Tarakan off the east coast of Borneo.
Part of the landing party.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, we were all, or earlier than that I think, we were all told to be on deck, all dressed with all our gear on, and about 3 o'clock it was, I think, the barrage opened up with the destroyers and the battleships and all the rest of the ships that were out in the bay firing over our heads. We were in close to the shore and they were firing over the top of us, and you could hear the shells go whoosh over the top of you, and the next thing there'd be a mighty explosion on shore.
You were occupying the island.
Not
from the Japanese.
Yeah, there were Japanese on shore.
They were
And,
dug in there, weren't they?
Yeah, and we after the naval bombardment was dying down, then the Liberator bombers came over. I don't know how many there were dozens of them, one after the other, and dropped their bombs on the installations on shore. And there was a hill just up from the shore where there was oil tanks, because the island was just running in oil, crude oil, and these tanks would have been full of oil, and they'd, because the bombardment, either the naval bombardment or the air bombardment, had burst every one of them, and all the oil had ran down on the harbour about a foot deep. on the water in the harbour. And if they'd have been able to set it alight, we'd have been all fried, I guess. But we eventually came in, and the intelligence was pretty crook, because the landing ships, you're supposed to be able to drive off them when they hit. And the first one came in and they drove a jeep off and we never saw it again. And just went straight down.
Through the oil and everything.
Yeah, through the oil and mud and everything else. But it was mud, just mud. And so they must have had some idea of it, because the landing ships were carrying big pontoons along the sides of them. And that was tanks, square tanks, about 1,500 millimetres square, all bolted together, 2 wide and about, I don't know, about a dozen long. So they dropped them and manoeuvred them around in front of the landing craft, between them and the beach on the land. And that's what we drove off on these. They'd wobble a bit when you go off in a heavy truck. But the army were off first, of course, and we didn't get off till the next day, because they had so much resistance, and you wouldn't think it'd been possible to be resistance on the shore after that bombardment. But it was. And someone somewhere fired a torpedo at us, and it just struck the landing craft we were on, a glancing blow, and hit the shore. And it didn't hit hard enough to go off, of course, but we survived that one, and we eventually got ashore, and we set up camp a couple of miles from the beach, and we could hear all the machine guns and the heavy guns banging away. And we were several of us, or a group of us, they told us to pitch our tents in this particular area, and they parked a water truck and a truck with provisions in it. They said, look after yourselves, and so we pitched our tents there, and beside this little stream, which was quite a ways from us. One morning we woke up, and the first guy stepped out of bed. He said, hey, it's wet. And the tide had come in. There was a bit of a slope on the tent, and the bottom side of the tent we had about 6 inches of water. Because the tides there rise about 20 feet. And we came in on low tide. Anyway, we were there for a couple of days waiting for the army to take the airfield. And one day we were there, and an army captain came in, and he said, I need a dozer driver, quick. And I don't know what the other guys were, all general hands, I think. And I said, okay, I'll come. In the jeep, he said. He said, those are your dozers up the road, are they? I said, yes, they're ours. So up we go up to the dozers, and I get one of those big D8s, and you've got to start a little motor to get down to drive the big motor. Got one of them going, and he said, now, it's about 2 miles up the road, we've got a tank blown up, and the road's completely gone. But you come up there and fill the hole in. So I get the old Caterpillar going up the road, high gear, flat out, about 2 miles an hour. Or probably about 4 miles an hour, I suppose. I get up there, and there's a tank on its side. It hit a mine in the road, blown a great hole in the road. And he said, just want you to dig up the road back a bit and push it into the hole so we can get through, because on the other side they had a couple of jeep ambulances with wounded men on them. And he said, don't go too far back because there's still mines in the road there. We don't know whether they're alive or not. So I started digging up the road and pushing in this hole. About halfway through it, I saw everybody disappear. They'd all hit the ditch. I said, the dickens. And I went to jump off the dozer, he said, and he stuck his head up, he said, keep going, we'll take care of that. And there was a Japanese machine gun over on the side of the hill, about 200 metres away, I suppose, and it was just about out of range. It was just about spent when it got there. But anyway, I kept going, and there was another tank that he just swung the turret round and fired half a dozen shots into it, and no more woodpecker. Japanese machine gunners we call woodpeckers because the sound they make. Anyway, we got the hole filled in so they could get through. And then within a few days we were up to the airfield then, because that was on the way to the airfield. And we got to work there, and what the hell, I got all the good jobs. I had a little, this time I had a little D4 bulldozer, and our officer said, all these steel plates, I want you to drag them up the side of the strip, because the Japanese had covered the lot of bomb craters with steel plates about 3/4 of an inch thick, and they'd probably a metre and a half wide and about 5-6 metres long. So I was hooking them on and dragging them off. And an army officer come along, he said, hey, you better not do that. He said, there's still, that mines haven't been deloused in there yet. I looked at our officer and he said, keep going, we've got to get them off. So, got them all off without the explosions. But the next day I saw a truck drive across there, an army truck drive across there, and got in almost the same place, and up he went. And someone must have been looking after me, I suppose.
I think that was. Yeah.
But,
you better not tell about the patrols you went on, and
no.
the wires that got tripped and things like that. But
eventually we got to the airstrip, and most of the time I drove a truck hauling gravel, sort of gravel. The strip ran right out into a swamp. Actually, it was a swamp that was part of the ocean that came right up. And at high tide, the strip would rise and fall.
really,
Come up with the tide. The engineers had them all flocked for a while because they couldn't figure out their levels. They said the levels not what they were yesterday. Anyway, we eventually got this worked on there, and these bomb craters were a pain because there was no real, what they call real gravel. It was a gravelly kind of red dirt that we filled in these bomb craters with, and because they were full of water. And every night it rained. You'd get probably about 2 inches of rain every night. Daytimes were beautiful sunny days, but at night it rained and it bucketed down. And we lost a bulldozer in one of these bomb craters, almost lost it. It went down, it was down to the above the top of the tracks. You couldn't see the tracks at all. And we eventually got another bigger dozer hooked onto it and got it out. Otherwise it had a bulldozer in the middle of the airfield. There was a Japanese gun up in the mountain that used to, it was 75mm, and every once in a while they'd run it out of the tunnel and they'd fire 2 or 3 or half a dozen shells at the airfield. Never really did any real damage, but just to give us a few scares. One day we were working there and there was a bloke on a grader, and one dropped quite close behind him, and he jumped off the dozer and off the grader and into the ditch. And then he realised that he'd left the grader running. And He was chasing it down the strip. Looked so funny. He eventually caught it up, and a lot of funny things like that happened. But when we were driving, when I was driving the trucks, we had to go right up a hill up to right close to the where the front line was. So we had a guy with us. We used to call him riding. He rode shotgun with us because I had my rifle, which was in a place to hook it behind you. And the other guy had his rifle ready, so in case you were, because we worked 3 8-hour shifts right through, and but we never had come into any problems at night. Everything worked out. We were able to just drive back and forth, lights blazing.
So you were still there at the end of the war, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there at the end of the war.
Still?
I was in hospital. I had dermatitis.
Wasn't the war work?
When the war ended. And after the war ended, I was. They gave us a choice of either staying in the islands for 12 months or going and joining the occupation force. I said, I'll never go to the occupation force. And so they sent me round to Labwood on the other side of Borneo to a medical unit. And I was there for about 4 or 5 months, I think. And I met my Uncle Neil there. He was in the Army Engineers, and he was on Labwood as well. And we had Christmas together. He came to our unit for Christmas. And they said to us, if any of you guys
can get waiting a while.
Yeah, about 3 months. They said, we don't know when we're going to go to Japan, but if any of you guys can hitch a ride home, we'll give you a leave pass and come back when we're ready for you. So I said, oh yeah, fair enough. So we were shipping some sick people back to Australia, and I said to the pilot of the aircraft, any chance of getting a lift? No worries, he said. Just give us a hand with the patients and you'll be right. So 7 o'clock one morning we were down at the airfield, loaded the patients, and away we went. We landed at Ambon to refuel, which is in part of Indonesia. And then on to Darwin. We spent the night in Darwin. Next day we went to Townsville, and from Townsville I got a Qantas flight home. And when they wanted me to go back, I said, oh, not really interested.
You'd met me by then, hadn't you?
I said, I don't really want to go back.
Yeah,
and they said, okay,
on your
well,
mind, didn't you?
yeah. Okay, well, go to Sandgate and we'll discharge you from there. And then I got my discharge and came home. I guess when I came home before I was discharged, the last time, I saw this gorgeous young thing sitting on the cowyard fence. I took an immediate interest in her. It's a long story from there on.
So you didn't go to Japan, so...
No.
And so Marge was married by this time. Oh, I didn't tell you about Marge and Royce meeting during the war. They met when they were both in signals up in Signal Corps up in North Queensland.
In Cairns.
In Cairns, up in Atherton Tablelands actually, and Royce was the dispatch rider and Marge was in the signals, and their wedding was during the war. They married, and I was the bridesmaid for that, and they were married in our little Yandina Presbyterian church, and I remember the first letter from Marge, that she'd met this tall, blonde sergeant. And so we thought, oh, she's mentioned him a few times in her letters, so that's interesting. Anyway, he came home and he was supposed to be from a good suburb of Sydney. And so Mum had to make sure everything was just right when he came home, and Dad grilled him to see what his prospects were and things like that. And so they were married. None of Royce's people could come up, so they had the little ceremony there in the Press Church, and they vow to this day that I wrote "just married" on the train carriage when they went on their honeymoon. They went to Noosa or somewhere from Yandina on their honeymoon, and I can't remember writing "just." I wouldn't do that, would I?
Not much.
So Marge was married then. That's right. And so then Ron got married. It was after Ron was released, so it must have been close to the end, and Ron married Marjorie, Ron's wife. Had just her sister and her husband had just moved into the farm next door, and she was visiting with her sister, and Ron came home from the army, and there was Marjorie, and so they were soon married, and then was the time for them to move back to the farm down at Tallabudgery. And Ron had by this time an old Chevy Ute, I think it was. They loaded it up with all the furniture that
29 Chevy Ute
that Mum and Dad didn't need, and Gwen was to go to help Marjorie because she was pregnant. So Gwen went back to the old farm again here, back to milking and helping Ron, while Marjorie came up when she could, sort of thing. Until finally, Dad sold the farm up at Nambour. Got out of debt, he reckoned. He hated the AMP because he was in debt to it. They hated being in debt. And but what did they do? They left Ron on the farm at Tallabudgery, and they went to Moolumbar and bought a farm down there, and that was sugar cane and cattle again. Dad had to build the milking bales to milk the cattle again, but we did have machines put in there, which was really very, very nice. And it wasn't such hard work. It was just the washing up really after that was the hardest work, and which takes us down to Moolumbar, and I think you've all seen Moolumbar House, where Ron and Marjorie raised their children later, when Mum and Dad retired into Southport and built the home at Fisher Avenue. And Ron and Marjorie, then they sold Tallabudgery Farm, and Ron and Marjorie moved to Moolumbar because it would be a nice place to raise their family, because it was so near to the school and near to the high school, and it was a very good home for them. So we get working on the farm with Dad again. Never did go to work to earn anything. Never earned a penny in my life. I just worked for my food, I suppose. But Mum and Dad were very loving and kind, and always gave me a nice home. And Fred's brothers and I were good friends. They were the next door neighbours when we moved to Moolumbar. They were on the farm next door by then. They'd moved too. And Fred's mum used to say I'd go down and help them with their milking of their cattle as well as ours, because they were leasing some of ours. Oh, it was a long story anyway. Some of our cows were down at their place when we arrived, because the man we bought the farm off didn't want to milk, so he leased them to Fred's dad, who was Mr. Curtis at that time. Not Fred's dad, to me. And so I'd go down there and help them with their milking. And for some reason or other, Mum had me go and help with the washing too. All those boys, she'd say, Mrs. Curtis needs your help down there, Gwen, so washing day I'd have to go down and help Fred's mum wash. But that was fine. She was a nice lady and I got to be real good friends with her. And she used to talk about Fred all the time. And being a teenager like I was, oh yeah, you know, I didn't say where does he fit into the scheme of things. And she used to always say to me, we've got a cot that used to be Granny's and that's Fred's. And I thought, oh, he must be married then, whoever this Fred is. And I was enjoying his younger brothers, who were teenage boys, and they were good fun. And we swam in the river and rode together and things like that. And one day I was down at their yard. This is before our yard was built. Dad was still building a yard for our cattle. They were still being milked down at Curtis's. And after milking time, we'd sit up on the fence and I'd talk to his brothers while they did the washing up of the dishes, of the separators and things. So you can take over there now.
Well, a lot of things got to happen before then.
Oh, never mind then. Anyway, first thing I saw of your father was the top of his head, because I was 6 foot up the rail fence sitting on the top. And after all the work was done, in walks this sedate looking, not a bit like his brothers, sedate looking man with waves in his hair, and he walks right over to the fence and starts to talk to me. So I'm looking down on him like this and thinking, all those waves, they don't look natural. And they were all oiled up with brill cream, you know. In those days it was all shiny waves right across. So you better give your impression of what you saw at the top of the fence, I suppose. Don't get bashful.
Well, I walked in there and I had heard about this, that they were milking the cows for these people next door who had moved in next door, and they had a teenage daughter, and I walked in there and I saw this gorgeous young woman sitting on the top of this rail fence. And I thought, that's interesting.
Interesting.
Well, I liked the look of what I saw.
Okay.
I said a few words to her, I suppose, and nothing much more at the time. But before too long, an opportunity came to. There was a ball on in the Wollumbar.
Oh yes,
And,
I remember that.
And I said to Marge and Royce,
they were home by then and they were both staying at our place, Marge and Royce. They were married.
I said to Marge and Royce, would you like to go to the ball? And bring your young sister with you.
That was my first date with him. He wasn't game to ask me for fear I said no, not interested.
So we went to the ball anyway. And that was the beginning of a long and exciting friendship.
Yes. And I found out that he was more than pretty waves on the top of his head, so he was quite worthwhile, interesting,
I was on the final
good young
leave.
person.
Final leave from the Air Force. I had to go back to be demobbed after that, which was only a couple of weeks.
And we found that we were really good mates, good friends. So we were good friends before we were married, because we went together for 12 months. Dad says, Mum and Dad used to say, you've got to have a year's engagement before you're married. That's the thing to do. Dad says, Dad didn't want to get rid of his good worker, did he? But I don't know which it was. But for some reason or other, we went together for a year, and then we were engaged for a year, and then we were married. And that was okay. So we had a lovely wedding in the Presbyterian church in Wollongbar, didn't we? Because we were both Presbyterians, and of course that was very acceptable to both families.
That was a bonus, that was.
That was just a bonus, really.
For our families.
They thought it was... Little did they know that we were going to end up not being Presbyterians, but that was it. So we had a lovely wedding reception, and I told Mum and Dad I only wanted 45 because I didn't want them to pay money for any more than that. I just wanted to get married, didn't I? And and so yes, only the aunties and uncles that I liked I invited, and that was a lovely wedding. And Mum's mother and father were there. We've got a photo of that. We'll send you some little bits from that anyway. And we went to Ballina on our honeymoon. The motorbike and sidecar was still going strong because we'd sold the little car Dad had. He started off with a little Austin 7. And then
Morris 8.
Morris 8, that's right. When we first went together, he had a modern car. It was a truck, but it was a... And then we went and we bought a block of land, didn't we, as soon as we were engaged. And so we went down from the Morris 8 to a Austin 8.
Austin 7.
Austin 7 for a little while.
After the motorbike.
Oh, I loved that Austin 7. It was so good. We had another one later, didn't we, when we were in Southport?
Yep.
That's another story. But this one, anyway, we bought a block of land and we started to build. We had our plan, and Fred had drawn that up, and for this house in Wollongbar in Prince Street. And we saved like anything, but by the time it came to a year to get married, we still hadn't saved enough to build the house. So Fred and his father disappeared one Saturday and came back, and he said, "Oh, come and see what we've got. We've got a shed to live in. We've bought a
garage.
A garage. We've got a garage to live in." And I thought to myself, well, the garage is planned to go into the hill under the house on the plan. I couldn't imagine why we would need a garage. So I went up to the block, and here's this. It was okay. It was just big enough to have a bed in one room. Someone else had had it while they built their house, so Dad thought it was, and it was fine. It had paper walls.
The outside had weatherboards on the outside. It was lined with sisalcraft,
which is paper.
Which is a kind of paper.
Tar paper. And it was, you went up 4 steps. It was placed behind on the back of the block. And you went into the bedroom at the front, which was the bed sitting room, and then through to a little kitchen in the back, and you even put a laundry on the back, didn't you, when I complained that his...
Yep.
Oh, that was a different story, wasn't it? And it was a nice little place until the summer came, and it got very, very, very hot and uncomfortable, didn't it?
We were married in January, so it was summer.
It was already summer, and then I fell pregnant, so I started to feel the heat, something awful. And but it made a home for a while, and we went up to New Guinea from there, didn't we? Because we decided that if we were ever going to have a home, we needed to be earning a little more than Dad was, because he was just in his last year of apprenticeship, and it wasn't really very big income to live on.
Well, I was getting full wages because the government were paying the difference between
okay, but there still
apprentices' wages and carpenters' wages.
Wasn't enough to get a house, so...
Carpenters' wages in those days were £5 a week, which is $10 a week. And
yes, and we lived on it okay, because we didn't do anything too much, did we? And so we contacted Marge and Royce, who were living in Finchhafen in New Guinea, and said, because we knew the wages were more up there because it was out of the country, and you got a house with a job, any government jobs going. And Royce said, oh yes, we need a shipwright up here. Fred's a carpenter, he can build ships too. And Royce was the number 2 Kia for the second administrative officer. wasn't he? So he had a little bit of sort pull. And that's how we landed in New Guinea. And Fred's mum and dad retired from farming, and they took over the block of land with the little house on it. And that did them until they bought themselves a house, sold the block and bought another one later. So we spent 15 months, was it, in New Guinea? About that, I think it was. And we'd saved up quite a bit by then, enough to put a deposit on a house in Southport. We came back and we stayed with Mum and Dad in Fisher Avenue while the house was being built.
Bought a block of ground just round the corner.
Round the corner from Mum and Dad in Kerr Avenue. And we called it Lallandau, which is a New Guinea name for
cool winds.
And Paul was born while we were still at Grandma's. And she didn't have room for a cot in her bedroom, in the front bedroom with Mum and Dad's spare bedroom. So we emptied a suitcase and I tied the lid up with a piece of string to the bed head so that it wouldn't fall down on him at night. And he slept in that, and Dad built a cot in the new house around in Kerr Avenue. And it was only a matter of a couple of months, I think, until we moved around there. And so we lived in... So going to New Guinea we had saved quite a bit. And we lived around in... what was the number in Kerr Avenue? We should remember that. Might still have Lallandau on it.
Don't think so.
And we looked out from the back porch and we could see right down to Lotus Creek, across the top of the little creek there. And that was where Mark was born when we were there, so we had the three boys running about there, playing about while Dad was working for some time at a joiner's shop up the road, and then he decided to go into business for himself. And underneath the house he made his workshop and made kitchens, cabinets and inbuilt beds, and furniture were coming into vogue at that time. That was about 1953, early 50s. Mark was a little boy.
Beds with drawers underneath them was the in thing.
That was the in thing, yes. And Dad did a lot of those for the new guest houses over on Main Beach and Broad Beach and little one-storied places they were in those days. But the boys had a lovely time there, playing around with Dad's machinery under the house. And Mark used to zip around the corner to Grandma's all the time and make scones with Grandma when he was about 2. Girdle scones. She made girdle scones because she was Scottish. And Mark and Grandma were very good friends, and so they all enjoyed being there, I think, especially with Dad working at home, even though there was a lot of activity under there, and 15 steps up the back, and the laundry was downstairs, so I was very fit in those days, and I could zip up and down those steps real easily. And we sold that home, didn't we? I can't remember the year we sold that. When Mark was about 3, I think, or 4, because we could make a little bit on that and put it towards another house.